Hello there and welcome along to the channel once again. It's so good to see you again. And I'm really excited that this is the final video in the MS102 study series that we've been going through in the last few weeks on the channel. Our final subject today is DLP, or data loss prevention. Before we get into it, a quick bit of housekeeping. If you've not already done so, please subscribe to the channel. It's so important. It helps me to grow. Please also like the video as well. That helps me to reach more people and for YouTube to distribute the video around to more individuals so we can help them learn, which is what the aim of the channel is, to learn, share and repeat. So grateful for your support. Please do keep on liking, commenting, sharing, all that good stuff. But let's get into it. Let's get into our final topic in this series, DLP, coming up. Well, folks, we're almost at the end of the study guide for MS102. The last section we have to cover is implementing Microsoft Purview data loss prevention, or DLP for short. We have got 3 bullet points to go through in this final section. We need to cover implementing DLP for workloads such as email and Teams and SharePoint, etc., etc. Implement Endpoint DLP, which is a whole separate thing in and of itself, and respond and review DLP alerts, events, and reports. We should be able to cover all this in one video, I'm thinking. Let's wrap this up. So let's dive straight in. And we need to be back in our old favorite, the Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal at compliance.microsoft.com. Make sure you're logged in as ever with the appropriate admin credentials. Compliance administrator, for example. Here I'm in as a global administrator. In the real world, you would certainly not be suggested to do that. Global admin is very, very specific in terms of its use. But anyway, let's take a look at what DLP is all about. And we can navigate to the solution on the left-hand solutions bar under data loss prevention. We have a few sections here. We can take a look at the overview page first of all, and here we have a couple of informational points at the top. It's telling us, similar to what we saw in sensitivity labels, that if your role group permissions are restricted to a specific set of users or groups, you'll only be able to view data for those users or groups. So you can view those role groups there and learn more about those role group permissions. We also have the option here to protect even more sensitive information on Windows endpoint devices by turning on advanced classification, which allows your endpoint DLP policies to detect named entities and exact data match classifiers in files on users' devices. So we've looked at exact data match in previous videos, very briefly albeit, and I do intend to do a bit more of a deep dive on exact data match in a future video very soon, hopefully, because it's a very fascinating subject and very, very useful. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that on, because that is a really good setting to have on. And there we go, nice and simple. You can now create or update endpoint DLP policies to detect named entities and exact data match classifiers in files on those devices. There we go, and you can go right into the settings, and that takes you to the endpoint DLP settings. We'll come back to that because that's skipping ahead. So back to that overview screen. What have we got on this section? First, well, we've got these tiles here, and we can see how we can look to protect sensitive info within our tenant. And we've got some insights here, and it's showing us that there are 118 unprotected documents in SharePoint and OneDrive that contain sensitive financial, healthcare, human resource, IP and trade secrets, or account info. The recommended action for that is to detect these type of documents and notify you when it's shared with people outside your org. So you can take action right from here. You can get started, and if you click on that, it's going to give you some quick actions to set up default DLP policies, which is pretty awesome, absolutely awesome. So what this is going to do is create the selected policies for medical health care information policies, financial information policies, HR information policies. So let's actually do that. Let's go ahead and set up those default DLP policies. This is great. This is taking a lot of the work away for us, which is a wonderful thing, because let's face it, IT admins, security admins, compliance admins, we've all got a ton of stuff to do, right? We need to save ourselves time wherever this is possible. Now, we'll take a look and see what that's created for us in a moment. What we can also do from this point is we can actually go ahead and view the detected documents, which is awesome. We can see here to explore a particular category. We can click on it and see all the matching documents and files and locations. So all medical terms and conditions, all full names, US driver's license, and we can go ahead and click on those to see the details by clicking on the three dots there, the ellipses. We can view the details, and it takes us into Content Explorer, which is a feature within Compliance Center itself, further up into the Content Explorer. And here it takes us right into that sensitive information type. We can drill down, we can see in the OneDrive and SharePoint sections here, we've got matching items. So let's take a look. We can expand these out, and we can see exactly what is matching, what these documents are, and what we need to take care of. On the offending folders there, I can see that I've got some content in a folder called MS500, which is all the content for a book that I've been writing on the now almost defunct MS500 exam guide. Now, that is being repurposed as a general admin guide as a result of that happening. But anyway, very, very useful. So you can drill down a bit further, all the documents, and you can see the sensitive information types that are matching. You can see trainable classifiers that are matching as well. Superb. Let's go back to DLP. Where were we? We were in the overview screen. So this is absolutely fantastic. We can stay informed about DLP. We can follow setup guides, read docs, get all the latest news. We can see the top activity detected. There is none at the moment. We can look at our device health overview and view affected devices that may be not quite up to date or fully protected. That relates to Endpoint DLP, of course. We have adaptive protection, which is a very, very new feature of Microsoft Purview and DLP, which allows you to automatically mitigate potential risks. And it combines data loss prevention and insider risk management capabilities to help minimize risky activity early. So lots of cool stuff, and we can turn that on. I will turn that on because it's something I will want to do a video of in more depth at a later time. So let's get that turned on. Extend protection to auto labeling. So what it's telling us here is we have already policies protecting sensitive info in email. Extend that protection quickly by setting up auto labeling policies that apply a sensitivity label to email, matching those same conditions as your DLP policies. If we click on Get Started, there we go. It's telling us that the policies below, which it has set up for us, are protecting email. So select one to set up an auto labeling policy that automatically applies a sensitivity label to the email that matches the same conditions. So we've got default customer account info M365 policy, default finance info protection policy, HR, healthcare, IP and trade secrets. Let's select the finance one. And right from in here, we can create that auto labeling policy. We can give it a name. We can choose the sensitivity label that we want to apply, automatically. You'll remember these from the last video, the general, personal, confidential ones that we set up. And we can choose our label, confidential, for example, and run the policy in simulation mode was probably where I would suggest starting. Don't turn it on right away, or you can leave it off. We've got a little note here, since encryption is turned on, a large amount of content might be automatically encrypted, so be mindful of that, as we said in the last video. I'll not see that through, I don't want to do that right now, so we'll cancel out of that, and we'll get back on topic. But that's a quick view of the overview screen. Adaptive protection turned on very quickly there. We can go to that straight away now, and that's going to take you into insider risk management. But again, we don't want to do that just now. It's basically linked DLP to insider risk management there. So there we go, overview screen. So now let's go into policies. And as you can see, we have some DLP policies here already. We have got default policy for devices. We've got default DLP policy for teams. And much like sensitivity labels, we have an order of priority. This is the order in which the DLP policies will be processed. So this order matters. But as you will see as we go through the DLP policies, you can affect that by turning off processing further DLP policies under certain conditions. Now, a key thing to be aware of here, when you select these auto-create DLP policies, as we have just done, it sets them to on. Be very, very, very careful of that. This is not something I would recommend doing in the real world. I would go through, and if I were using this method to create the policies, it's a good way of getting some good policies in place, but I don't want them to be on right away. So I'm going to first go in. I'm going to change that immediately. So I'll select the first one, the default policy for devices, and I am going to edit the policy. And there we go. Now, once a policy has been created, you cannot change the name of the policy. So it's done all this for us. It's created a name of default policy for devices. It's given us a lovely long description, much more diligent than I am, as you will know by now. I normally just put test in there or nothing at all, but this is how a description should be. This policy detects the presence of credit card numbers in files on devices. Brilliant stuff. This is what we want. So we can change that description here, but we can't change the name. So this is what you'll see, by the way, when you create a new DLP policy. So the experience is the same. If you edit it, it goes through that creation wizard once again. Now, much like sensitivity labels, you can also use admin units, which I'll remind you is still a preview feature. A reminder that admin units is a feature that allows you to create units of administrators that have responsibility for certain groups of users within the organization. And it's probably most appropriately configured in situations in large organizations that have multi-geo presence throughout the world, or due to regulatory reasons where certain teams or departments in an organization need to be segregated. So we're not going to configure this. Admin units is something we can look at in another video at some point. Locations, where is the policy going to be applied? Now, this one is a devices policy, so it's going to apply to devices. So there we go. We've got devices selected. We have no other location selection checked here. But you can see that we could have chosen Exchange email, SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, Teams chat and channel messages, Defender for cloud apps, on-premises repositories, and Power BI. We don't want to change any of that. Let's go next. Here we have the rules for DLP. Now, when you create a policy from scratch, you can create it with the default rule configuration, or you can customize advanced DLP rules. And in this situation, what we have here is we have a low volume of content match and high volume of content match rules, which we can edit both. Now let's take a little quick look at, and we can toggle these on and off as we need to, but let's take a look at editing these rules here. We'll start with a low volume one, and the low volume one will most typically have the less restrictive or less aggressive settings in place. So what this is going to do, this rule is matched if 1 to 9 credit card numbers are detected in a file when a user performs certain device-related activities. When detected within a 24-hour period, the activity is only audited and not blocked, and admins will not receive alerts. So we're basically looking for those matches, 1 to 9 instances, and it's a less aggressive action in the conditions, which we can see here. In the conditions, we can see that we are looking for a sensitive info type of the type of credit card number. We're setting that to be a high confidence level, that is what the match is going to be. And the instance count matches what we have above in the description, 1 to 9. And then under actions, we have audit or restrict activities, and here we can see that under service domain and browser activities, it will detect when protected files are blocked or allowed to be uploaded to a cloud service domains based on allow block cloud service domains list in Endpoint DLP settings. Now, what you will note as you become more familiar with DLP is that the actions and selections that you see in these advanced DLP rules will change depending on the location type you have selected for the policy. So as we have a device-based endpoint DLP type policy here, the rules reflect the fact that this relates to devices. And you'll see where these settings are configured more broadly in a few moments in this video when we look at that at those core settings for endpoint DLP. So there we go. And then we've got audit only, but we could be more aggressive. We could block with override, or we could just block. File activities for all apps. So here we have the option to do or do not restrict file activity. We could apply restrictions to specific activity. So we've got some choices here in terms of what happens when there are certain matched activities like copying to a clipboard, copy to a removable USB device, a network share, printing activity, and so on and so on. And we have the option here, and these are all set to audit only because this is the low volume of match content, less aggressive, but we could make that selection change to block with override or just block. I'll explain block with override shortly as we go forward as well. So there we go. File activities for apps in restricted app groups. This is a preview feature. So restrictions enforced for apps in restricted app groups, which we'll see how you configure in the core settings shortly, will override any restrictions you configured in the file activities for all apps above. So this is an override setting to that. So you could add a restricted app group into here if you so wished, but we'll not do that. And then we have restricted app activities. So this detects when apps that are on the restricted apps list defined in the endpoint DLP settings, which again we're going to get to. Again, we have that set to audit only. We can add further actions here. So we can choose to tweak this policy by restricting access or encrypting the content in Microsoft 365 locations or further audit activities. So we can change these policies that have been set up for us. Now, earlier on, we'll see that we did not have user notifications set up. That was clear in the description for this rule. So this is where you control that. User overrides as well. Now, what we mean by overrides is when a rule is applied as part of a DLP policy match, you can choose whether you want the user to have the ability to override that policy. If you want to give them that feature, that capability, if you trust the users basically to have the awareness and the confidence in them that they can make that decision. So that's a very important thing to consider in terms of setting up your DLP policies and rules. If you do want to allow those overrides from the users, then another thing you can do is require a business justification to override. So they can override, but before they can proceed, they will be required to enter a justification, which is then audited, and then you can view that justification in the Activity Explorer. We then can configure some Settings for incident reports, so we can choose the severity level in admin alerts and reports. So this is a low volume of content match, so we have low, but we can choose medium and high as well. You'll remember that at the top, the description showed us that admins are not going to be alerted when there's a rule match, so that is toggled to off. And then there's some additional options there. If there's a match for this rule, stop processing additional DLP policies and rules. And that's what I was alluding to in the order of priority and why it matters. So if this rule is matched to a user, then you can choose to stop processing further rules in the list order. And you can then choose to change the priority level of this particular rule. So this is number 1. We could move that up the list to be 0. And the more you have, obviously, the more you'll have to select there. So that is fine. And then if you've made any changes, you can click Save. We've not made any changes there, so we'll click Cancel. Let's briefly go through and look at some of the differences in the high volume rules. Now this one, the high volume, is matched if 10 or more credit cards are detected in a file when a user performs certain device-related activities. When detected within that 24-hour period, the activity is only audited, not blocked. But in this case, admins will be alerted in email. So again, it's not going too aggressive. We're not blocking. We're just auditing again. But we're going to alert the admins on this occasion. So we'll see some differences here. We'll see instance count of 10 to any. Here we've got audit only again. Similar principles. This high volume one is actually not as aggressive as I thought it was going to be. I thought it would have a bit more difference in it. But we've got the alert to admins selected for this one, which is basically the only difference. What I really wanted to get to here, though, you'll remember that these policies and rules were created automatically for us. I don't want this turned on right away. I never do that with DLP. Always keep it off until you're ready, or more appropriately, what you should do is you should test it out first. And if anything, test it out first, but don't show those policy tips in test mode just yet. Because policy tips are visual cues that the users will see in their applications, on their devices, which show them when there's been a policy match and gives them actions that they can take, such as overriding and providing a justification. But from an admin point of view, you may want to just test it out first to basically see what would happen when there's a policy match. So you'll be able to audit that activity and make sure that that the policies are and rules are doing what you expect them and want them to do. And if they're not, you can tweak them. Then, when you're happy, what you can do is you can tick this one and show the policy tips and target the policy to not everyone. Have a proof of concept group, have a pilot group of users who are going to test it out for you and who you can educate. So this gives you the control in terms of rolling out DLP in the most successful way. Testing and educating users, and then and only then expanding it out and turning it on completely. So that's a big flaw to watch out for in terms of creating those policies automatically. Definitely watch out for that. So I'm going to submit those changes, and it's going to change those settings for me. And in a moment, when it has finished, we should see, yeah, it's updated. I don't want to do any of the related tasks. Now we've got even more DLP policies now. I did wonder when we went in there why I only saw 2, because I thought it created a lot more for me. But now I can see that the other ones have also been created, so I just needed to be a bit more patient. But now you'll see that I have got this one set to test with notifications. So there we go. So let's take a little bit of a look at one more. Let's look at this default DLP policy for Teams and see how that differs, because this is targeting service settings rather than device settings. So if we go into this one, we shall see some different things. Okay, so if we edit again, we go through the same thing. And we can see that this policy detects when the sensitive info below is shared in Teams messages. And after turning it on, you'll be able to monitor alerts to help you decide whether to refine the policy further by adding policy tips to educate users or protection actions to control sharing. Okay, so next, admin units, we're not interested in that just at the moment. Now, as you can see here, we have Teams, chat, and channel messages selected as the only workload here. So there we go. Now you can mix and match. You can have different services and locations within the same policy, but I quite like having these separated out as much as possible. It just makes things easy to manage. But there are some awareness pieces that you need to consider in relation to things like Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint and Exchange email for that matter, in terms of where things are stored. Now, first and foremost, before I even get to that, there are some license considerations as well. Now, to be able to successfully use DLP with Teams chat and channel messages, you need to have an E5 license. That is not true of many of these other services. You can do DLP for Exchange email and SharePoint sites and OneDrive accounts with the E3 license subscription. You don't need that E5. Now, you do need E5 for the Teams chat and channel messages. You do need it for some other selections as well. I believe it may be the case for devices as well, and probably for Defender for Cloud apps. But I'll put some linkage in the description for some of the DLP licensing permutations for you to take a look at. But those are things to watch out for. Also, if you're wanting to take account of protecting content relating to Teams, you'll notice that this is just for chat and channel messages. It does not account for files that are stored within Teams. Now, if you want to protect that content, you need to select SharePoint sites to cover that. So there are also situations where you might have files that are shared within those chats as well, and that content would be stored in the individual's OneDrive account also. So again, there are various permutations in terms of what you need to consider. You basically, to cover yourself, you need a good, diligent set of DLP policies that is going to take care of all of these locations. You need DLP for all of these to make sure that you are fully protected for all of those scenarios. Really, the core DLP policies that any organizations need to begin with are these top four. You need Exchange email, SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, and Teams chat and channel messages. You probably do need devices as well. Endpoint DLP has been around a while now, but it has its challenges, shall we say. It's not the easiest to configure and get right and get it to do what you want it to do. I think it's got a ways to go, but it's good. It's a starting point. But just be aware that it has its difficulties. But these last three, these are the real niche ones, if you like, or these last four even in many ways. So again, you can filter down who you want to include or exclude in any of these locations. So, and always do that. Always begin with a smaller group, a pilot group, a proof of concept group. So choose who you want to include or exclude as needed. Let's take a look at the advanced DLP rules. In this case, we have only the one recommended rule for Teams here. We haven't split it into low and high volume of content. The conditions here: content contains any of a particular sensitive information types. So that's US bank account numbers, US UK passport numbers, credit card numbers, social security numbers, EU debit card number, etc. And we want to send an alert to an administrator. So let's just have a look and see how that differs slightly from a endpoint DLP type policy. Again, and when we go into the edit rule, we can see the name, which we cannot change, the description, monitor for those card details, with a rule to alert the administrator. We get a look at the content contains matches here, and there's a lot in here. We've got US bank account number, US UK passport number. There's a lot, and you can add here as well. You can add sensitive information types more into there that you want. If you want to, you can add trainable classifiers as well. Absolutely fantastic. So we've got confidence levels in here. We've got some set to medium confidence, some set to high confidence. Instance count here, because we've only got one rule, we don't have a low volume and a higher volume. This is instance count of 1 to any to count all the matches. We can add further conditions in here as well. We can add content contains, and then we can add more. So we can do that. So we'll just get rid of that, and we can add users risk level for adaptive protection. We can put in content is shared from Microsoft 365, recipient domain, sender, recipient. Lots of good stuff we can add to this if we need to. User notifications. Again, we've got those off here, but we could toggle those to on. So we can switch those on and off. And as you can see, when we expand that toggle switch, we get some other options there. We can choose to notify users in Office 365 with a policy tip. We can then customize that policy tip text if we want to, so I'll not change that. We can select the user overrides as well, but we need that user notification on, I believe, in order to configure that. Yeah, that ungrays that out. So yeah, and here's where you would put those settings into place. So allow the overrides from M365 services. You can require a business justification to override. You can also override the rule automatically if the users report it as a false positive. And just remember that this all gets audited. So all good stuff. I'm not going to change these here. I'm just going to demonstrate that you can. Incident reports, use this severity level in admin alerts and reports, so you can choose low, medium, or high. We have the send an alert to admins when a rule match occurs, setting toggle to on here. And it's automatically added in my user here because I've created the policy. We can add or remove groups here, and then we can control how the alerts behave. We can send an alert every time, or we can send an alert when the volume of matched activities reaches a threshold. So we've got this one set to instances more than or equal to 10 matched activities during the last 60 minutes for all users. Or you can set that to a single user. So you can get very granular here in terms of what you want to have in your DLP policy rules. We can also use email incident reports to notify you when a policy match occurs. Now here you have to be very, very careful what you select here. So you can send notifications to these people. Now site admin is automatically included, but you can also add or remove other people here as needed. Now all incident reports include information about the item that was matched, where the match occurred, and the rules and policies it triggered. So you can also include more information in the report, such as the name of the person who last modified the content, the types of sensitive content that match the rule, the rule's severity level, the content that matched the rule, including the surrounding content, and the item containing the content that match the rule. Now these last two here, be very, very careful about that, because bear in mind that anyone who's going to get these notifications is going to be able to view this content. Now that means, as an example, and I actually had this happen. I heard a story of this happening at a customer that I visited some years ago, where the CEO had sent out an email with his banking details and was confident doing so, rightly or wrongly. But the CISO had found out that DLP was set up and these were ticked. And in going in and seeing these incident reports, those selected to receive them could see the CEO's banking details, which is not on, basically. So be very, very careful with these settings. Think about who you want to be able to see these notifications. So lots to consider. So that's just to illustrate what you can do with those email incident reports. I'll toggle those off again, and we're not going to make any changes, but that just gives you an idea of those rules. The policy mode, again, no, please don't do that to me. I want to test it out first, and I want to submit and change that, and we are all good to go. Amazing. Right, there we go. Done and done. Okay, next, let's have a quick look at the Endpoint DLP course settings, and then we'll come back and look at alerts and Activity Explorer. So Endpoint DLP settings. These settings apply to all existing and new DLP policies that protect content on Endpoint Windows and Mac devices. And support for some of these settings differ between Windows and Mac devices. So learn about the differences. Yes, please, we will have that link to share with you. So there's a lot of drop downs in here that you can configure in relation to your Endpoint DLP settings. Let's go through them and see what they do. First of all, advanced classification, scanning, and protection. When turned on, this setting allows the Microsoft 365 cloud-based data classification service to scan items, classify them, and return the results to the local device. This means that you can take advantage of classification features such as exact data match and named entities within your DLP policies. So we have got that one toggled on already. We can modify the allocated bandwidth limits as well, sending content from the local device to the cloud services for scanning and classification can utilize a large portion of network bandwidth. Should this be a concern, you can set a per device limit for how much bandwidth can be used within a 24-hour period. If this limit is exceeded, DLP stops sending content to the cloud and data classification will continue locally on the device. If bandwidth utilization isn't a concern, you don't have to set a limit. So very handy feature, one that should be very carefully considered. Next, file path exclusions for Windows. So files in these Windows device locations will not be monitored by your policies. You can add in the file path exclusions. Nice and simple. So there may be situations where you want to exclude things in the DLP policies. The same for Mac. You can do exactly the same for Mac to exclude certain file paths if required. Next setting, set up evidence collection for file activities on devices. Setting up an online storage will let you store and collect original files as evidences when any rule matches for configured file activities. Learn more about setting up the storage. Yes, please. We'll have that link for you as well. We can toggle this setting on and set the evidence cache on a device. You can set the cache here for 60 days, 30 days, or 7 days. We can go ahead and add our storage here. We can put in our name and our URL to our valid storage. Very nice. Okay. So make sure to check out that link about setting up storage. Network share coverage and exclusions. You can extend Endpoint DLP coverage to network shares and mapped network drives. Let's have that link. Yes, please. Again, let's toggle that on. Files in these network shares won't be monitored by your policies, so we can add in a network share path exclusion as needed. Yes, that's fine. I'm happy with that. Restricted apps and app groups. Here you can control the level of access that specific apps have to the sensitive content detected in your DLP policies. So create groups of apps to enforce different access restrictions for each group, or add apps individually to one list to apply the same restrictions. Learn more? Yes, please. Okay. restricted app groups there and restricted apps below. So you can add an app group, you can add your group name, your description, enter the app name and the executable name. You can auto quarantine files that are blocked from accessing apps in the group. So say for apps, similar principle. And we've got some example ones here that are already added in. So we've got restricted apps like Notepad++ and the executable name. We have Atom as well. You can see how it works. Pretty simple. Auto quarantine settings. Edit these settings to specify a location on users' devices where files should be quarantined if they are blocked from accessing an unallowed app that has the auto quarantine option selected. You can also replace the blocked file with a custom text file to let users know why the file was blocked and where it was moved to. So the auto quarantine status is on, and we can edit these settings here. So we can toggle it on or off, and we can enter the path to a folder where the files will be quarantined, and the path to the folder where the files will be quarantined for Mac OS. And you can also choose to replace the file with a text file that contains the following text. So really cool stuff there, and you can get some information on what that does. So when the blocked file is moved to the quarantine folder, this text file will be added to the location where the blocked file was previously stored. It'll have the same name as the blocked file. Enter text, letting users know why the file was blocked and where it was moved to. Cool stuff. Unallowed Bluetooth apps. So here we can add or edit unallowed Bluetooth apps. So we can toggle this on or off. We can add the app and the executable name. So when a policy's copy or move unallowed Bluetooth app setting is selected and users attempt to use these Bluetooth apps to copy or move protected files from a Windows device to another location, the activity will be blocked. Or blocked, but users can override the restriction. All activity is audited and available to review in Activity Explorer. Very nice. Browser and domain restrictions to sensitive data. So here, you can restrict sensitive files that match your policies from being shared with unallowed browsers and service domains. So firstly, unallowed browsers will be blocked from accessing files protected by your policies. When blocked, users will be prompted to access the files using Microsoft Edge, where they'll be able to interact with the content but be prevented from uploading to unallowed service domains. So users who have, important note here, users who have the Microsoft Purview extension installed on their devices will not be blocked when using Chrome, even if Chrome is listed as an unallowed browser. So always watch out for these little informational alerts there. So we can add or edit unallowed browsers. And we can see here we have some in the list already. Who knew there were so many browsers actually? The obvious ones are towards the top of the list, but there you go. Nice stuff indeed. We have service domains as well, and this one is set to off, but you can set it to allow or block instead. So here we can control whether sensitive files protected by your policies can be uploaded to specific service cloud domains from Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome, provided the Microsoft Purview extension is installed on their devices. Let's just have that link. So you can choose block to prevent certain domains from accessing these files, or allow to specify safe domains. So here we can add a cloud service domain into the list. There we go. Next we have sensitive service domain groups. So you can configure the groups of service domains that contain the sensitive data. So similar principle, but just add groups of domains there instead of individual domains. Additional settings for Endpoint DLP. Okay, business justifications for policy tips. You can control how users interact with the business justification option in policy tip notifications that appear on the devices. This option appears when users perform an activity that's protected by the block with override setting in DLP policy. So you have some settings here to show the default options in a custom text box. You can only show the default options or only show the custom text box. So you've got some options there in terms of how you can control those settings. You can also customize the options in the drop-down menu. So here we have five different, in fact, options that you can control there. Should you have that feature enabled. Always audit file activity for devices. Well, that would seem to be a very sensible one to have on. So by default, when devices are onboarded, activity for Office, PDF, and CSV file is automatically audited and available for review in the Activity Explorer. So turn this off if you want this activity to be audited only when onboarded devices are included in an active policy. So you've got some good controls there in terms of how that is going to be audited. So file activity will always be audited for onboarded devices, regardless of whether they are included in an active policy. Printer groups, printing. Okay, so these can be used in your Endpoint DLP policies to apply different restrictions to a specific group of printers. So we can create a group name there, and we can add a printer, I couldn't even begin to test this right now because I don't have any printing, but who prints these days? Probably way more people than I realize. I'm probably being very anti-printer there in my attitude, so shame on me. But let's move on because I hate printers. Removable USB device groups. So here, removable USB device groups can be used in your Endpoint DLP policies to apply different restrictions to a specific group of USB devices. So again, you can create, similar to the printers really, group names and add a removable USB device and so on. Network share groups, similar principle. You can create the network share groups there. And then finally, the last setting here in Endpoint DLP is VPN settings. So when setting up Endpoint DLP policies, you can apply different restrictions to activity performed when users are connected to your organization using the VPNs that are included here. So you can add or edit a VPN address if you're using a VPN in your organization. So there we go. When configuring a DLP policy to restrict activity on your devices, you can control what happens to each activity performed when users are connected to your org by using the VPNs that you add here. So there we go. So lots and lots of settings you can configure in the core Endpoint DLP settings here. And you should carefully consider these, how they are set up before you create and deploy any DLP policies that are targeted towards endpoint devices. There we go. So we've been through overview, we've been through policies, we've looked at Endpoint DLP settings. Let's take a look at alerts and Activity Explorer. Now, I'm not going to see any alerts in here just at the moment because this is a very, very new clean demo tenant, and we've just set up those DLP policies. I'm trying to think if I may have another tenant I can show you. I may have a look in a moment, but any alerts that you have will be displayed in here, and you can filter by time range and user and alert status, but there's no alerts to show here. You will have to turn on alerts for your DLP policies to view the alerts here, and you can learn how to turn on the alerts if you haven't right here, and the capabilities of the alerts dashboard. Let's have those lovely links to help you, and we'll include those in the video description. Okay, what have we got up here as well? Did you know you can now manage your DLP alerts in the Microsoft 365 Defender portal, and alerts are automatically combined into incidents, which provide a comprehensive view into potential policy violations and advanced tools for investigation and remediation. So you can learn more about the incidents from here, or indeed go to the incidents page that it's referring to. I think we're probably going to get a similar experience from the Activity Explorer. So here, I mean, Activity Explorer is by no means limited to DLP in the broader sense. I mean, in this instance it is, because it's under DLP, so we're going to see only DLP specific Activity Explorer content in here. But if you go further up under data classification, you would see all Activity Explorer alerts. As it happens, we don't have any because of the nature of this tenant. But again, you would be able to review activity related to content that contains sensitive info or has labels applied, such as what labels were changed, files were modified, and more. And it's modified across Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Endpoint devices. Support for more locations coming very soon. So I've quickly switched over to another tenant, which is a little bit more advanced in terms of what you can see under data loss prevention. In the Activity Explorer here, we can see a bit more content. We can see that a label was changed or a label applied. This was actually me in the previous video, I think the other day, on the sensitive information or rather sensitivity labels that we covered. So any DLP related activity would appear in here as well. Under alerts, there was no alerts to show in this one either, but I did get a little bit further in terms of being able to show you some of the usual behavior, and this can again vary depending on your policy settings, that the users will encounter. So I opened a Word document and I put in my credit card and national insurance number details. I will blur these out, but even if I did not remember to do so, they are fake numbers, so they're not going to be of any use to anyone. It didn't bring up a policy tip in Word online, but what I did see is that when I tried sending a message with my credit card details in, we got a result. We had a message was flagged here. What can I do? So your message was flagged due to an organization policy, credit card number. Here's what you can do. If you think the message was flagged in error, you can report it to your admin. Reporting will not unflag the message. So you can report or not, depending on what you want to do as a user. This is why it's important to train the users for what to expect when you're deploying DLP. They're going to get different experiences, different capabilities across teams, across devices, across other services in M365. And things like their documents in OneDrive and SharePoint and so on. Email is another good example. It can be deployed to Exchange Online. So I composed a new email here, which I started typing out. And as I typed in my credit card number into the email, you can see I've already got a few tips here. I'm getting the following recipient is outside your organization. I can see that it's encouraging me to send during work hours because I'm recording this on a weekend. Here's the policy tip though. Your message conflicts with a policy in your organization. Show the details. Okay. The recipient isn't authorized to receive this type of information. So I can remove the recipient, or I can view details about the information that appears sensitive. So I can learn more there. And it shows me the message appears to contain sensitive information type of credit card number. Again, I have the option to report. The policy that this is triggered on this tenant is not giving me an override option. So on that policy, I obviously don't have that configured. But what it's saying here, the recipient isn't authorized to receive this information, so remove the recipient. What that probably means is that the policy rule that is matched here is set to trigger when such content is sent outside the organization. So if I remove the recipient, what I will probably find, and the warning goes away, so I'm trying to think, which tenant am I on? Who could I send a message to who was on the same tenant? Do I still have James Smith? Yes, I do. There we go. We've got James, who is in the same tenant as me. And because that rule only applies to external, there we go. The policy rule does not come up. So there you go. You can see the power of DLP and the various permutations and why it's very important to take your time, get it right, crawl, then walk, then run, have a good diligent testing period, proof of concept, pilot group, and in that pilot involve helpful users across the organization, but also, and I always say this in any situation like this, involve the more challenging users as well, the ones who are going to ask the awkward questions, the ones who are going to criticize any change or be fearful of change. And on day one of something being launched into production, if it isn't quite right, they're going to be having a big smile on their face saying, I told you so, or this isn't as good as the old way of doing things. So these are the things you need to consider when you're thinking about your DLP deployments. So lots to think about. DLP is amazing. It's very powerful. But it's got to be done right, or you can get into all sorts of problems. Okay, let's start winding up. And that's it, folks. We're done. We're all done with MS-102. I'm so thrilled at the response to this series, and really happy that we've got all the videos done, and you should now all be in great shape to learn all about MS-102 and know more about M365 in general from the very beginning and Azure AD. Lots of good content that we've covered. I may do a final debrief on this because I think there are one or two final considerations that I'd like to share with you in terms of study prep and so on and so forth. But I'd love to know your thoughts on the series as well. I've had some wonderful comments in each video so far, and people reaching out to me on LinkedIn and Twitter saying how much they've enjoyed it and how much it has helped them on their journey. So thank you so much for that. Your support really means a great deal to me. But what's next? Well, there's more content to come. Don't worry. There's the beauty of this platform is it's ever growing and ever giving. So there's always plenty to share. There's always new features, changes. There's more exam guides we can do as well. I need to get back to e-discovery. I've had a lot of you asking me when I'm going to get back to my e-discovery series, and I wanted to get this one done before we got back to e-discovery. So look out for that. It'll be coming very, very soon. So nothing's going to change. There's going to be more videos coming. And I'm so enjoying this journey with you and talking to those of you who've reached out. So thank you once again. Reach out to me on Twitter. The link is down there. Please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps me so much. And I'm going to leave it there. Stop talking because I talk too much. And we'll see you all in the next video coming real soon. Take care. Bye now.